Nothing we say here is investment advice, legal advice, life advice, or representative of the views of the organization we are part of or affiliated with. See chainabstracted.com for more information.
Hey everybody, this is Chain Abstracted. I've actually sort of like forgot what the opposite episode is. I've been just doing a bunch of things. This is actually 5th this week, so which is quite rare. But I'm Altan, and one of the founders in the ecosystem. And we have Joe today, actually. I'll let him introduce himself, who's going to co-host this with us. And we'll do a deep dive into chain signatures, which we're quite excited about.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm Joe. I'm from NEAR Dev Hub. I'm part of the dev relations kind of arm of NEAR Protocol, and I also co-host a couple shows on Dev Hub as well. So thanks to kind of do the collaboration here.
Awesome. And we have Kendall from Proximity, actually, who's gonna talk about chain signatures, and we're gonna deep dive into everything from sort of technology side to the applications that we're quite excited about. Kendall, please introduce us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, guys. Hey, everyone. My name is Kendall. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Proximity that does a lot of research and development for the NEAR ecosystem. And we're collaborating very closely with the Pagoda team on the go-to-market for a product called Chain Signatures, which the TLDR is it's a distributed MPC network that lets any NEAR smart contract or account sign a transaction for any blockchain, which unlocks an entirely new design space and interoperability and even kind of chain agnostic applications that we're really excited about.
Cool. How did this start? Like, why? How did the problem? Where did the problem come in that, you know, hey, like a NEAR account should be able to sign a transaction? And just love to hear a bit more about the story of it.
Yeah, for sure. David from Pagoda is probably the best person to talk about the very, very early days, but at least as far as the problem space, I think it really started with, NEAR fortunately has some pretty heavily used end user applications. Several that are kind of in the millions of, DAU and MAUs. And the applications tend to be like one of the first touch points to kind of the blockchain world, or like using a blockchain application for these users. And so we're obviously couldn't be more excited about the direction of the NEAR ecosystem itself. The entire space is growing pretty quickly. And I think we're starting to see very interesting applications pop up on a variety of different chains. And so one of the problems that Chain Signatures is designed to solve here is like, well, how do we keep these users in sort of the NEAR context, keep NEAR as this amazing onboarding point, but then like actually let them interact with other applications on other chains. So that was like one angle that was sort of taken as like, what kind of technology could we use? Or like what type of solution could we build that would basically power that experience? And then the other side of the equation is that like, we've been working with a lot of great developers over the years. And oftentimes we feel like we're kind of competing against the other chains to basically get these developers. It's like, hey, you shouldn't build your protocol on X chain, you should build it on NEAR because of X, Y, and Z. And these developers, they're usually pretty early in their product sort of life cycle. And they're like, okay, I have to make this like really critical decision about my infrastructure and even like a community embed myself in when really I'm just trying to power this experience for users. Like maybe I don't even want them to know they're on a chain at all, but I still have to like make this crazy decision. And fortunately, like that's gotten easier for NEAR over the years because NEAR is a lot more established now. But when we were first starting out, we were like, hey, you guys should write in a language that no other chain uses. You should bet on us even though we're not live yet, may never go live. And you should take all of these risks like right as the first thing you do for your business, which is like kind of insane. So I think like what's really exciting about what Chain Signatures offers is like we can kind of like change the conversation a lot and say like, no, like you guys can be wherever you want. It doesn't really matter. But the cool thing is that if you use Chain Signatures, is like you're actually pretty abstracted from on an infrastructure level from needing to like really rely on any specific chain. Now, obviously, the caveat here is you have to rely on NEAR. Like, fortunately, the NEAR has now like almost going on 4 years of being live and no downtime. But it does mean that you can actually serve users wherever they might pop up. And I think especially for projects like oracles, dexes, lending protocols, like these type of things, like they really just want to serve users wherever they arise. They want to let the users interact with whatever applications exist. And so like they're pretty excited about like being able to not have to like lock themselves into a specific place. And they still, of course, can. You still can like build on Chain Signatures, go focus on the Solana ecosystem for 6 to 12 months. Like That doesn't change at all. But it means that if you then want to then switch and focus on like Aptos or Ton or whatever it is, like you can do that with a much lower lift. So yeah, all that together, I think from like unlocking more experiences for existing NEAR users and like turning them into really just crypto users, and then also like kind of changing the infrastructure decision making process for application layer developers is really what Chain Signatures was sort of born out of. That was like the spirit of where it rose.
It's a great introduction. One of the things that I want to just maybe highlight for people that you brought up here is that like you're not trying to necessarily get people to instantly convert their infrastructure, right? Like it's part of like you're seeing it as a process of, can we get you to this changeover in infrastructure? Because established projects might be a little weary of something like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're exactly right. That like it depends on the project we're talking to. The net new projects were like, hey, look, the cool thing is if you start here, then you can go anywhere. But yeah, for the established projects, the conversation does look very different. It's more like, hey, you guys are on the EVM. You're expressing interest in wanting to move to Solana, wanting to move to Ton, wanting to move to these other chains, or maybe even start Bitcoin. That's like a very common conversation we have today. And so what we say to them is, look, if you start to utilize chain signatures for your multi-chain plans, like doesn't even have to be for your base kind of infrastructure, this can basically dramatically shorten your time to integration on all these other chains. So it's kind of like for existing projects, it's like a great second step. It's like, all right, you're already EVM, you're already SVM, you're already MoveVM, whatever. Just go to chain signatures next, and then you unlock every other ecosystem without having to basically build. Like, this is a conversation we have with Oracle providers in particular quite often. Is like, hey, stop having to like onboard your team to like an entirely new virtual machine and like stack, build on chain signatures, and then serve those much more easily.
Yeah, so I have a question. I guess there's a bunch of L1s out there. There's NEAR, there's I can count maybe like 20, 30. What makes NEAR unique in a sense to play in this chain abstracted world? And maybe what are the features that were made probably in 2019, 2020 that enables sort of these features to be live?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, there are some L1s, not a lot, but some that are kind of playing in a similar space. I think Definity was kind of on the earlier side of this type of approach. Thorchain is like a very, very specific use case, but like a similar type of approach to this. But some of the advantages that NEAR has, I think it's two or three in particular. One of the earliest decisions that NEAR made was this idea of like enshrining smart accounts or this like account abstraction into the generic account design for the protocol from day one. Meaning that like basically every NEAR account can have any number of keys. It can have very discrete permissions. It can have a smart contract on it that it actually only kind of governing its own account. All of these things can kind of be true. It's like this was like really baked into the protocol, and it's actually made it really powerful. It's like there are other teams offering this kind of MPC or even programmable MPC, but combining programmable MPC with this really, really powerful account structure unlocks a lot of use cases. So like we've already seen quite a few wallet teams that'll be going live on day one, like Sweat and Bita in particular, that basically have like multi-chain account abstraction or like multi-chain passkey-based wallets. And they'll work for every single chain kind of out of the box, like on day one, which is something nobody else has. And it was a much lower lift for these teams to get to that point because we already have those smart account features sort of baked in. We didn't need all this infrastructure around it that they had to create themselves or work with other providers to get. It just existed in NEAR, and like we created best practices around it, done this stuff for going on 5 years now. So that's like been one huge differentiator. And then the other, I think, is, it really is going to be the scalability. Like if the vision here is to actually have NEAR be kind of like an entry point or like the origination for a very, very large number of transactions that'll land on other blockchains. So in a way that looks like NEAR needs to be able to support the throughput of a bunch of different blockchains combined. Now, I mean, I don't think we imagine that like NEAR will be the sole entry point to crypto by ever. But I think it will be for a large number of users and a large number of applications. And so that's easily, tens of millions of transactions a day, getting up to I think getting up to like the 9-figure number hopefully before too long. And so, you do need a really scalable base layer in order to be able to support that. And you actually probably even need to, like, one of the ways that like this whole thing works, there's like a smart contract that is where the signature sort of originates. If we start getting a lot of signature requests, like that might even exceed the throughput of a single shard, and so that contract actually needs to be deployed on multiple shards. And like we have a couple of teams already thinking through this. There's a couple of DEX teams who are thinking like, hey, if we really knock it out of the park here, we're going to have insane load, and so we actually need to get ahead of this load and like start designing our system to scale to this upfront. And because of the decisions that Ilya and Alex in particular and Bowen made many years ago, NEAR is going to be able to handle that, even if we succeed to our wildest dreams of having NEAR be like this kind of hub chain.
Interesting. One of the things that I've heard on previous episodes of this show of people talking about their infrastructure is, right, like you still have to kind of own like a good piece of it, even if you're trying to decentralize a lot of things. There's somebody who has to be that initial owner of stuff. How is that going to work on NEAR? And like you just said, like there's that concern, right, of like, someone's got to manage how do we handle that throughput and how do we deploy these contracts? How does that like look? Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, that is a great question. So right now the Pagoda team is the one who's responsible for like this engineering work, and at least while the product is in testnet, they will be kind of responsible for that contract that's deployed. I think in the very earliest days of mainnet, there will likely be some type of multi-sig that's going to be kind of owning that contract that probably be split amongst some of the early kind of NEAR core developer teams. But that's actually something that we at Proximity have been brainstorming a lot about, and we'll have, together with Pagoda, NF, and others, we'll have some proposals coming out to the community, I'd say in the next like 2 months. That I think paint a picture of how this could evolve. But basically to like give some insights into the way we're thinking of it. I think we want to look at, what some of the more prominent kind of DAO-based type of teams, like Compound, MakerDAO, and Aave in particular, where you do want to have some pretty distributed ownership of these like really, really critical contracts. I think you probably even want to get to a point potentially where you enshrine this into like make the choice be done by the validator set themselves over like this kind of core contract. Like maybe it even becomes a pre-compile at some point. And that way you can, and so like that's one side is like who governs the contract. The other side is like who governs the operator set. I think there's no question that the vision of who governs that operator set should be a combination of the NEAR validator set and the NEAR token holders. And so the proposal that we're going to sort of, or like the thoughts at least that we're going to sort of put out there and bring up for community discussion is going to be leaning into that direction. The fact that like it's absolutely imperative that this set of node operators is determined by the people who are using this system, which will be the NEAR token holders and ultimately the NEAR validator set. So I think there's a future version where like if this does become really like right now it's, call it an experiment. It's an experiment we're really excited about. There's like 15 plus teams building, even more that are really excited and like starting to get into it. It's like, I'm confident that it's going to be a thing. And I think, programmable MPC is part of where the space is moving for certain use cases. But it is still an experiment. And so it's like a little premature, I think, to enshrine this into the core protocol today, which is why it is kind of being, operated as like an independent sort of initiative by, independent teams. And it'll be kind of set up as like community governed, but like not enshrined into like NEAR itself. But yeah, if this ends up being, becoming a core differentiator for NEAR, if it ends up like, really, I think driving a lot of the economic activity on NEAR, I think there's at least a good argument that it should be up for consideration to be enshrined into the core protocol. Ultimately, that will be the decision of, the NEAR validators and the NEAR token holders in a really big way. And I think it'll probably be quite some time before that would be appropriate. But yeah, just the TLDR on that whole sort of statement. This needs to be community governed. It's extremely, extremely sensitive and important infrastructure. I think it offers a lot of benefit to pretty much everybody building in the NEAR ecosystem and gives a lot of teams a reason to build in the NEAR ecosystem, even if they do want to serve these other communities, which is a big unlock. That being said, it's it's sensitive, right? We're talking about like managing private keys here, and that needs to be done in as decentralized and trust minimized of a way as possible.
Yeah, that's quite cool. I mean, one of the things I've I wish I had the chance when I got into NEAR was to be able to interact with those communities and liquidity that comes with, like, I don't know, Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? I mean, this is quite a unlock. Yeah, I wish this was possible in 2022 when I got into the space, but it's happening right now, so which is cool. But love to hear a bit more about. Let's walk through it, sort of like a flow, technical flow. Let's say Kendall wants to send a transaction using chain signatures to. There's a new chain, which we called it, I don't know, Kendall chain, and wants to sign a transaction through NEAR, and how, everybody launches chains these days. If you can walk us through how that would work, that would be actually amazing. And I think the listeners would like it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So to set the stage a little bit. So the critical components of a chain signature, it's, as Joe kind of alluded to, there's the smart contract that's basically listening to requests for signatures. So that takes 3 arguments, around 3. A payload, which is basically like what should be signed. So oftentimes this will be a transaction or a transaction hash. It takes in a key derivation path. And basically the idea of like how the MPC network silos who can sign for what is twofold. So each NEAR account basically goes through this key derivation function. That key derivation function takes in the NEAR account as an argument. It takes in a derivation path, which means that like a user could control any number of accounts on any other chain. They can like augment the public key that's being used to sign so that they can, have 50 Bitcoin addresses or like 1,000 Ethereum addresses or 1 million. I mean, any number. And then finally it takes in like the kind of master public key of the MPC operator network, like which will change over time. That changes every time the set rotates. So with these 3 pieces of information, it turns into like this kind of unique key that only this account could sign for. So walking back to like the signature request, the payload, the key derivation path to like determine which account you're signing for, and then finally it's the key type. So initially the chain signatures product will support ECDSA signatures only. So that's going to be Bitcoin, every single EVM chain, most Cosmos chains. I think at least Aptos or Sphere both in some degree. And actually NEAR as of very recently. And so that's like wave 1. And then wave 2 later this year will be EDDSA, which will add support for Solana, native support at least, Solana, Ton, Substrate chains, and a few others, and Schnorr signatures on Bitcoin as well. So those are the 3 pieces of information that are passed in. So that's into a smart contract. And then listening to the smart contract is a set of the MPC operators. So the MPC operators are running like their own node software, basically. And they're literally like they have a NEAR indexer as part of their software that each of them is running, listening to requests that pop into this specific contract. So they see a signature request. They do that key derivation function to figure out, okay, this is the key we need to sign for this specific NEAR account. And then they basically work with each other to compute that final signature. Because each of these operators, they have a shard of the sort of master private key of this system, but they cannot alone basically compute a valid signature for like the end result kind of account. And this is how you basically protect the users ultimately of the smart contracts from malicious behavior on the part of some number of operators or hacks or these kind of things. So generally you want that set to be, on the larger side. And you particularly want that set to be, having like a pretty insane set of security guarantees. And like, we'll get to like this very long list of basically like defense in depth and how you can basically like lock down this network as much as possible, but more to come on that later. So those are the 2 main components. Smart contract where the system listens to requests, and then the operator network that basically returns those, like computes that signature and returns it back to returns it actually back into that NEAR smart contract so that it's all on chain. You have the request and the response on chain, which could also be used for like certain verification methods and potentially even add slashing if that was necessary for the system. So those are kind of the building blocks. So now let's get into like how I would request a transaction to sign on Kendall chain. So if I'm just like holding a NEAR account, I can actually just like send a transaction to this smart contract that includes the payload I want signed. So this is the transaction on Kendall chain. Whatever derivation path I want to use to like specify a single account. Probably I just use something like basic, like 1, 2, 3, or some kind of like hash. But usually this will be done in the front end. And then I'll let's say that Kendall chain is an ECDSA chain, so I'll like specify ECDSA. So I send this transaction request from my own account, and then I will receive back once the signature has been computed in a couple of seconds. the finalized kind of version of the transaction that I can then send to Kendall Chain. So that's how basically I would handle that process. Like I send a transaction to this sign smart contract, include the details, receive back the signed payload, and then I relay that to Kendall Chain. Now, typically for the user, they won't be aware of any of this happening. For them, it's going to look like, okay, I want to deposit ETH into Aave. Great. They'll click a couple of buttons, determine how much they want to include, get a pop-up to sign a transaction, do that. In the background, probably from the front end, the front end will be waiting to receive the signature, see that it was included on the NEAR blockchain. Great. Take it, package it into like a valid Ethereum transaction, and then hit some RPC provider, and then it'll make its way into the actual Ethereum blockchain or Kendall Chain or Bitcoin, whatever's being done. And then if it's a smart contract that's doing this, similar type of approach, where you'll have like some type of relayer system that'll be kind of managing this whole process end to end.
Good job getting Aave on Kendall Chain, by the way. But just joking with you. Good. I mean, this breaks down how it would work. On the user side, just one other question is like, how cheap would this be? Like, is it does it depend on the blockchain that it's interacting with, or do you guys have any like estimations? Because NEAR itself is pretty cheap, but like. Is it a dependency on, let's say we're signing a transaction on Bitcoin? How this mechanism would work?
Yeah, I mean, you can't really get around the fact that if you want this transaction to be included in a block on a destination chain, you're going to have to pay the gas cost of the destination chain. So Bitcoin in particular, because Bitcoin, Bitcoin really has they have a few different signature types, but there's really one action, which is like transfer Bitcoin. I mean, you could transfer 0 and you can include in OP return some data or something like that, and come up with runes or these different kinds of use cases. But it's pretty simple. So you are just going to be bound by that transaction cost. I think it actually gets really interesting on smart contract chains, because obviously there are different types of gas costs depending on what additional state you're adding into the chain, whether you're interacting with a smart contract, all these kind of things. What's really cool about chain signatures is that two things are true. One, you basically bring smart contract functionality to externally owned accounts. You don't have to actually interact with a smart contract on Ethereum in order to basically generate the transaction itself and determine what's going to be done in a smart contract on NEAR. And NEAR is much cheaper to use than Ethereum. So we've had a few teams experimenting with ways to actually almost act as a side chain to the ETH mainnet, because if you wanted to do a swap, for instance, one user has USDC, one user has ETH. If you send that swap through Uniswap, the gas cost is going to be much higher than if you just did a simple transfer of ETH to one address and USDC to the other, because you also have to hit the AMM pool, do the calculations, all those kind of things. With chain signatures, you could actually boil that interaction down to just a simple transfer. And I mean, I'd say on Solana or chains like this, it's not going to make a material difference. But on ETH mainnet, on Ton, interestingly enough, Ton has way lower gas costs for transfers than for smart contract interactions for whatever reason. You actually can lower the gas costs even on the destination chain just by sort of changing the structure of the way you're completing the action. So yeah, generally it's going to be additive. It's going to be the NEAR gas cost, which fortunately is very low, and there's not much additional cost for the signature. So it's I'd say negligible in the context of an Ethereum gas cost. For Solana or something like that, it'll be slightly more noticeable. But depending on what you're trying to do, I think it's really going to look more like the destination chain gas cost for the user than anything on the NEAR side. And oftentimes, I think the applications of the NEAR side will be willing to cover the NEAR gas costs, because they'll be making more from their fee on whatever the interaction the user is having than it'll cost them on the NEAR side.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting approach. Is the economics seem to really make a difference here in how you start to architect what your app is doing, how it's doing things. And it's, for me, it sounds like that it gives me the opportunity as a developer to be a little bit creative of how am I creating this user experience where it doesn't have to be, and for lack of a better term, so transactional all of the time on Web3, right? So part of the poor experience that people sometimes have is that everything's a transaction back and forth constantly. Where it sounds like here, I can be a little bit more conscientious of at what point do I need to finally send some kind of payload to a particular chain and to execute on what I want, instead of just constantly having to do that. But with that, I guess, comes of like, for the user experience, at what point am I, as the end user, signing something? Am I still constantly having to, open my MetaMask or whatever it might be and my Near wallet and constantly sign something? Or are we able to kind of abstract some of that away as well?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Maybe just to talk about a specific use case where I think you could take advantage of some of these patterns. So we're very excited about runes and ordinals on Bitcoin. But what we're not excited about is the current activity there, because, well, you have to interact with Bitcoin, which is slow and expensive and prone to a lot of MEV. So I would frame the runes trading experience today as borderline unusable, maybe even just unusable, which is why the volumes have been, like, frankly disappointing, despite the fact that the marketplaces are actually, like, pretty cool technical achievements, but they're just so limited by what Bitcoin can offer. It doesn't matter. The UX is just terrible. So what I think is really cool about chain signatures, you can kind of offload a lot of the interactions from, like, Bitcoin to Near, while keeping the UX as close to kind of Bitcoin as possible, in the sense that, like, you can actually let users still use their Bitcoin wallet even to sign the Near transactions. You can use meta transactions on the Near side to, like, cover the Near gas costs, so that users never have to, like, explicitly hold Near. So for them, they're basically trading runes. Eventually, they want to get those runes out of the marketplace back into their Bitcoin wallet, because, like, maybe they're maxis, whatever. Maybe they love Bitcoin, right? And, like, the whole point of Bitcoin runes is that they're on Bitcoin, right? If you're trading Bitcoin runes on Solana, it's like, okay, but that's like, what? Just trade Solana coins, like, So I think, like, really this should only be done for a set period of time. So, like, the experience we kind of envision is, like, step one, you deposit to an exchange. Everyone does this with centralized exchanges anyway. It's nice that on Uniswap you don't have to deposit first, but, like, you still have to sign the approval transaction and do those things. It's more or less the same. It's like the same friction realistically. So step one is deposit, but then you're in Near. And you're probably even in a specific contract on Near. So when you mentioned, like, the need to sign every single time, well, I mean, one of the coolest features on Near is that you can create, like, an access key that basically restricts very specifically, like, what you can do as a user with that particular key. That can be saved in your browser, so that you can, not have to explicitly sign transactions, but still complete things. And obviously you don't want to attach a ton of money to this, and that's why, for deposit withdrawals, these, like, fund movement, we typically recommend developers, or even require in a lot of cases, that developers cannot do this, and a user does it to sign a transaction. I think we can have the same experience where, like, a user sends their Bitcoin to this Bitcoin address that's controlled by, like, this marketplace contract on Near, and then with their Bitcoin account, or not even with their Bitcoin account, but they can then have an access key basically for that account, just be clicking buttons. They'll be trading runes. They'll be, making these interactions, like, they'll, changing their balance, whatever. And then finally, when they want to withdraw, then they'll sign one more transaction using their Bitcoin wallet, so they don't have to onboard to a new wallet. And they'll receive those runes or Bitcoin or whatever it is that they're withdrawing back to their wallet. And, like, for them, it basically felt exactly like it would if they deposited to Binance. Sign a transaction to get it into Binance, then just click a bunch of buttons, things happen. You can believe in those, in the sanctity of what's happening on the screen. Check it on chain, so it's even better than Binance. And then you can sign one more transaction to withdraw. So maybe one more transaction than Binance, because you'll sign to withdraw instead of just trust that Binance will actually process your withdrawal. But the benefit of that is that, like, for sure it's going to happen. So yes, the long way of answering your question, that, like, absolutely using Near here and some of the Near specific features, you can in fact cut down on the amount of transactions that users will have to sign. And you could repeat the same kind of pattern for anything. Like, you could do this for, like, Ethereum assets, ton, whatever. You can, like, kind of use Near. Near, I think, is probably the furthest ahead when it comes to, like, abstracting things from the UX. Like, we actually just have a lot of products as an ecosystem, and a lot of, successful ones that enable this type of, like, minimizing the direct interactions users have to have with, like, the messy parts of a blockchain. And teams now, like any team, even from other ecosystems or that's targeting other ecosystems, can actually leverage that technology because of chain signatures and the fact that they can let the user get back to the chain that they originated on.
as the end user, then, am I going to have to experience then like the longer wait times for things to settle? Like Bitcoin's obviously the longer settlement time than NEAR. How does that all kind of work out?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of it will depend on the application, but I'll give 2 examples. So an example I was just talking about with Runes, that deposit step, you would still have to wait for Bitcoin to settle in order to credit your account on the NEAR side. So there's a light client, fortunately, which is a great trust minimized way to be able to credit it, but it's going to have to wait for at least 1 block confirmation. It looks like Binance is using 1 block confirmation these days, so no more than 2, so like 10 to 20 minutes. So like that step will require time. No way to get around that, just like if you were using a centralized exchange. And then on the withdrawal step, you would. But then the intermediate part, when you're in the system, trading Runes, and it'll be Bitcoin denominated, that can be near settlement time. So that's one example. Another example, similar, but I think like we're excited about. So you can't get around that deposit step. You need your assets to be custodied by an account that's controlled by a smart contract. And so you're going to have to get your assets from like your personal account into that. That just will be kind of a fundamental limitation. I think it's intractable. Like that'll just be the case. But after that step, what's cool is like even if you're trading assets between different chains. So like if I'm on Bitcoin, you're on Ethereum, I deposit to my Bitcoin account that's controlled by this contract. You do the same thing for Ethereum. We can actually trade those assets, and like that settlement will happen at NEAR time, because immediately after that 1 second block on NEAR, I can all of a sudden sign to withdraw or send your Ethereum wherever I want to, and you can do the same with what was my Bitcoin. So like the settlement happens at NEAR time after that withdrawal step, even if like getting it into an account that only you control, that it isn't the smart contract, will take a little bit longer. Now, we might see this combined by some of the teams building wallets where like, you'll get your assets from wherever into your wallet. You'll be using it as your wallet, which is like already in the NEAR context. And they might be able to cut down on this even more, because then you're actually kind of just transferring the asset control on NEAR if you want to move it from like your Bitcoin account to one controlled by the smart contract. And so that might be able to abstract away that kind of settlement time even more. So there's a couple of like very exciting partners coming out on that wallet side that I think are going to do a good job of like really dominating the end-to-end flow from like custodying assets to trading them to engaging with DeFi. And I think that's where you're going to see some of the really serious UX gains, where like you might not need to interact with the Bitcoin blockchain very often as a user if you don't want to. And you can see some of those gains, but fundamentally, there's going to still be a lot of like deposit and withdrawal steps for users.
Yeah, that's great. I have a question on the sort of like the application side. So let's say somebody listens to this and gets quite excited about chain signatures. Like, what are you guys seeing on the proximity side? They're like, oh, this is something that nobody's building, and we would want someone to build on. Maybe like a couple of use cases that I know you mentioned about bunch. Maybe you can start with like mentioning what you're excited about currently, and then what you want people to build on.
Yeah, so definitely that Runes example. I think there's an opportunity to make Runes great for the first time, not even again, like literally make them great. So I'd love to see teams do that. I think Bitcoin lending, there's still not a good retail-friendly Bitcoin lending protocol. And what I mean by that is like, if you have Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain and you want to borrow against it, you're looking at like an hour minimum and like probably 2 wallets with bridges and all kinds of different gas costs in order to actually do that. And especially to do that in size. And I think that's like ridiculous. We're convinced that, with chain signatures, a team could get it down to like 2 steps: deposit, send your Bitcoin to an address, and then borrow. And that's it. Like you set your borrow details, and you could end up with a stable coin and potentially have that stable coin just about anywhere, maybe even in your Binance account, like wherever you sort of want it. Which will be, and that can happen within, I'm confident that can happen within like under 12 minutes, probably pretty close to 10, which is a Bitcoin block time anyway. Which would be, like a good, 6x speed up with like 3 less steps. So I think that would be super exciting. So that's in the Bitcoin side. Then I think like probably the most interesting design space, like nobody's really explored this because until now it hasn't been particularly possible, is this idea of composing, like having an application that composes multiple different blockchains together. So it's basically like one application, one end user experience that's leveraging like either applications or entirely different blockchains that are existing on different chains. So an example I've been giving a lot of this is like if you were a big fan of Athena and the fact that they've got this like tokenized basis trade kind of product that earns you like a more or less stable yield with like pretty high APY that's like somewhat sustainable, at least over the long term. And you wanted to do this in a decentralized way, you'd have to compose together at least 2 or 3 blockchains. So you need to choose either ETH or Bitcoin on their native chain. So like, let's use Bitcoin because it's more fun for this example. So you have Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain. Then you somehow need to like turn that Bitcoin into USDC on either Hyperliquid or DYDX. So if you can swap it, so that means you'll have to bridge somewhere, but like that would suck. Or you could borrow against it, which is better. But then you need some chain with the lending protocol, which can't be DYDX because they're an L1 that only supports the swaps. So like now you're looking at minimum 2 blockchains, and then you like fine, you borrow USDC against your Bitcoin. You now need to deposit it into DYDX and get that 1x short position. 3 blockchains. You can't do that today. You cannot do that in a decentralized way. With chain signatures, though, which will be on mainnet very, very soon, you would be able to do this because you can basically create this Bitcoin deposit account from the smart contract on the NEAR side. User deposits their Bitcoin to this account. Then on NEAR, you could actually have the lending protocol that'll let the user borrow against that Bitcoin and borrow at like a higher loan to value since you know it's going to be backed by the 1x short position. So you like let the user borrow USDC. Then that same contract, as soon as that USDC is borrowed, goes and like CCTPs or layer zeros or like whatever is that USDC over to DYDX and buys that 1x short position. And that's using a chain signature, right? Like the contract is actually creating that order to be put into DYDX. And then you can tokenize that. And you can know that each of those steps will actually happen. And that if any of those steps fails, you can roll back the whole thing, get the USDC back to the lender, get the BTC back to the depositor, all of that, because it's actually all being controlled by a smart contract on here. And each of these signatures is being generated in the exact proper order for the exact proper amount. And all of this is verifiable. So that's just one like kind of over the top complicated example of like something that has not been possible before a system like chain signatures that now will be possible. And so that's an entirely new design space. I mean, there's a lot of things that we have no idea about that people are going to do. And so I'd love to see people thinking about what types of applications could you build if you have like the entire crypto ecosystem of applications and chains and things open to you.
Yeah, I want to, if you don't mind, I want to kind of stay in that space a little bit because there's something that, you know, when I talk to a lot of different developers and products, that one of the things that starts to come up of, especially now in Web3 and crypto, being so new still, is that it's sometimes hard to find like where my product actually can fit in and be maximized. And what I mean by that is, you know, how do I actually take advantage of this technology that's put in front of me? As you in your role at Proximity and as someone who is constantly talking to people on the ground, how much of this is like a educational sales pitch a little bit of to show them? And then how much of it is like we actually just need that initial product to show the power of it, and then it'll be easier for people to start to kind of come in here and do that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say it's both and more efforts, right? It's like, I think, you know, fortunately, what's cool about this technology is like for a lot of teams who are already building a NEAR, they kind of immediately get it. I think part of it's like we've been priming teams for this for a while. And they're like, oh, I mean, so like for Bit to Mint-Base, the formerly known as Mint-Base, Sweat, in particular, Here Wallet, they were like, oh, this immediately opens up what our users can do. And so like I think there was very little, like once we described what it was and what the intention was, they're like, great, I understand it. I can do this. And like, now it's just further their goal, right? For some teams like a Ref or a Burrow, I think kind of similar where they're like, oh, cool. Like we can now list assets that exist on all these other chains that users want. Great. For like this kind of net new use case, like the one I just described, that's where it's a lot more of like, okay, we need to come up with a lot of different ideas and like generate ideas in the community, like, you know, like really try to inspire people and educate people about what's possible. I think like that, like the net new use case has been the much harder thing. They're like, okay, you can do XYZ in a better or different or new way. That's a bit of an easier conversation. But like, opening up the design space, like that's where it's been much harder, right? So that's why we're kind of taking the onus upon ourselves, along with like Pagoda and others, to really try to come up with as many ideas as possible, like formulate them, shape them, create some diagrams of how it could work technically, and from like a user experience perspective, and then share those with teams, like, and to sort of get people there. So I would say it's like it really depends on the team and it depends on the use case. There are some no brainers. There are some just immediate unlocks, and like it immediately makes sense for a team because it's like they're looking for that solution. And then there are other like the like more pie in the sky type of stuff is definitely more long term, educational, a lot of conversations. It's just gonna take more time for sure.
Yeah, is that something where it's imperative that communities like within the ecosystem are trying to help fund them, whether it's through like hackathons or just in general, or is it something like we just want to see it kind of naturally evolve? And I guess this is like a fancy way of saying like what is the time horizon where you really need to feel that people are understanding it and like rocking it and actually being able to start to leverage it? Like how much do you force the issue on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the onus is on us, us being like kind of everyone, but like, whoever wants to take it upon themselves to start making things happen and like figure out how we could use it ourselves. Right. And I think that's like step one, and like demonstrating what's possible. But like, so I guess the short answer to that question is like, I think we should force the issue, just because I think like without forcing the issue, it might not really happen. Right. Like trying to create an ecosystem around a new design space, I think requires like the originators of it to be very build the kind of dog food. It requires a lot of dog fooding, I think, to get right. That's something we learned from like the whole NEAR experience, right? Is like dog fooding is absolutely imperative. It's like the only way you can really get people to use your stuff. You even said this like at OpenAI, right? It's like, yeah, I mean, obviously people were excited about, OpenAI before ChatGPT, but like ChatGPTs were like, that's what opened the design space, because people were like, oh, okay. So I think it's like the same story for us as well.
Yeah, so in terms of, I guess, how should one start building on chain signatures? And like, let's say, there are builders out there that see this podcast and want to kind of contribute to building on chain signatures. Like, what's the point of contact, or what are the docs that they can see? Just curious about it mainly, so that others can kind of jump in and start building.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best way, I would check out, we actually have a link tree that has an easy, it's like Linktree/chain signatures, that has links to the docs, to videos, talks, examples, code repos, that, can kind of help people get started. I'd say that's the best way to dive in. Like the docs give a lot of examples themselves. They walk through the code that you need to structure. They walk through kind of the flows that how this works. In that link tree, I have a couple of talks with like diagrams that show like, here's how you build a multi-chain DEX. Here's how you build a multi-lane lending protocol. Here's how you build like an ordinals DEX. I think that's probably the best way to get started, as far as like figuring out what you can do. And then when you're ready to start talking to people, like on the proximity side, we have on our website, proximity.dev, we have a contact form. Where like once you have at least like the beginnings of an idea, you're like, I think this could be really cool. You can reach out to us through that, and we will chat and help you brainstorm, help you figure out how to structure it, whether or not like how to go to market, do all of those kind of things.
And yeah, one of the things I just remembered now is like is very under talked is like the NEAR community. I think like how do you see them? What would be your advice for folks to kind of support the chain signatures? I think launch that's coming up in the next weeks or so. Like what are the ways that community can support the launch in general?
Yeah, absolutely. if you are a fan of chain signatures, I'd say like please help us promote it, talk about why you're excited. Ask questions. Questions are great too. Asking questions in public. A lot of us are sitting on Twitter and can answer them, and that's a good way to generate a conversation, which is great because I think that we just want to get the word out. So I think that's like the easiest way. Just talk about it. There's going to be a lot of kind of long-time NEAR ecosystem projects that will be coming. There'll be some of the first products to market. Sweat is going to be one of them. Bita going to be another. Diffuse, which is by some of the Aurora team, which is like a great multi-chain DEX. Allstake, which is by the Linear team, which is like restaking any asset on any chain. Here Wallet, obviously one of the most exciting, I think, teams in the ecosystem right now, all coming out with products. They're like, support the great builders in NEAR as they kind of show what's possible. And many more coming. So I'd say that's definitely the easiest thing to do is just like, we really want to get the word out. Tell your friends, especially if they're in other ecosystems, especially if they're in Bitcoin, these types of communities. Just trying to get the word out, and then obviously building. I think there's so much that can be built here. There's a lot of tooling that'll be necessary, and the best way to figure out talk to us, talk to people who are building on chain signatures today, or even just try it out. Try to build something, even something simple like a smart contract that controls Bitcoin assets, and you'll see all the different things that are required there. Like it's a long time horizon project that's going to need quite a lot of infrastructure around it. So just try to get involved and start building.
Awesome. Well, anything else, Joe, from your side?
Just saying, I think, I probably could do another 2-3 hours just talking about different parts of this, but as an introduction, I think this is really great. And I did want to just kind of end on maybe to eliminate some confusion, because I do see this on social media a little bit too. So the term gets thrown around of like chain abstraction and chain signatures. And I still see people sometimes using it interchangeably. Some people use it differently. The Ethereum crowd certainly uses it a little bit differently. Chain abstraction specifically differently. So, like, what is the proper terminology people should be using, and what's the difference of all these different parts of it?
Yeah, I guess I see chain abstraction as kind of like a goal, right? It's like the goal is to abstract the chains, like either abstract the friction of moving between chains away from like more crypto native folks, abstract away the friction of like onboarding into crypto for newer folks, and maybe even abstract away the fact you're using a blockchain at all. But like those are goals. Whereas like chain signatures is like a product that can enable teams to build these kind of chain to achieve the goal of chain abstraction and minimizing this friction and creating these really high quality user experiences. So like that's how I would differentiate them. There's like chain signatures is one of NEAR's sort of key sort of product and features in order to like fulfill the sort of vision of enabling chain abstraction.
Awesome. Well, yeah, this has been great. I think it breaks down everything from how chain signatures work, what people can build, and so nice to have you here and chat about pretty much everything about chain signatures, chain abstraction. But yeah, thanks for coming along.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, super fun. Awesome. Thanks.